This video is an introduction to and analysis of Teddy Roosevelt's life philosophy, which has come to be known as the strenuous life. The strenuous life is, as it sounds, a life devoted to strenuousness, to strain. But strain isn't the final goal, but rather a life of fearless, expansive doing, of fearless belonging, and the internal goods that can only come from trying to achieve extraordinary goals. The strenuous life seeks out effort that challenges oneself. The goal of work is not rest. The goal of work is to prepare us for more rewarding work. The goal is not to feel at ease, but to be alive. And to Roosevelt, being alive meant doing. This is a picture of one of the many locks being built at the Panama Canal. The Panama Canal was built during Roosevelt's time. A lot of people thought it was impossible. He delighted in it like nobody's business. He was the first president to leave the country while he was in office, and he left the country to go see that construction. To help us understand the strenuous life and its motivational logic, it will help to introduce a new concept to you, a concept called the adjacent possible. The adjacent possible is all of the things that can happen one move from the current state. So think about all the different things that can happen on a chessboard, or all the different moves a knight can make, right? There's 8 different places it can go if it's toward the center of the board. Or in Monopoly, there's 11 different roles you can have to move your piece around that board in the next move. It's all about the next move. It's a kind of possibility space of the thing that could happen next, because not everything can happen next. Some things take time. So think of yourself in the room right now. There are things you can learn that are 1 learning step away. There are things to learn that are 5 steps away. So you have to do the other 4 steps to get there. You can't just do calculus. You have to learn algebra first. You have to learn geometry first. Calculus is not 1 step away for you. You want to play varsity football someday. Well, there are steps you need to take to get there. You can't get there in 1 step. So varsity football is not in your adjacent possible. It's out there possible. It's just not the adjacent possible. It's not 1 step away. So the adjacent possible is a space of possibility that surrounds everything in the world. So how does this concept of the adjacent possible relate to the strenuous life? So remember, the strenuous life is about straining at the limit of what you can do. And so think about this. If you strain at the limit of what you can do, if you push the limit of your adjacent possible, then you will have more possible than was possible before you did that deed. If you just sit there, your adjacent possible doesn't change. So Emerson has this famous quotation, Ralph Waldo Emerson, really powerful quotation that's relevant here. The law of nature is, do the thing and you shall have the power, but they who do not the thing have not the power. So try to think of the strenuous life's goal as a bigger adjacent possible. Try to think of yourself as a 1-year-old. Like, what were you capable of doing as a 1-year-old? Very little, right? As a 2-year-old, you could do more. Like, you could walk as a 2-year-old. Think about what that means. Like, walking, taking a step, it literally with your feet is in your adjacent possible and where that allows you to go. Think about you when you were 5. Compare it to now, where you can play sports, where you can read, you can give presentations, you can think, detailed, full thoughts, right? None of these things were possible when you were younger. You actually had to do a lot of things to get where you are. And I'm guessing you hope that you're going to do a lot of things to get somewhere else, right? And not just anywhere else, but someplace that is alive with possibility. That's the key to the strenuous life. By straining, you open up more adjacent possible. You open up more possibilities of being. So one way to think of the strenuous life is to realize it's intentionally trying to expand the adjacent possible. Sometimes things just happen. Like we set up all of these assignments for you to do at school. We structure your day for you so that even if you don't want your adjacent possible expanded, it's going to get expanded as long as you're at St. Mark's, because we're going to make you stretch yourself. To Roosevelt, this is the most important thing in life, right? The possibilities of doing are the most important things in life. So you don't want to leave that to chance. You don't want to run the risk that you're not going to have somebody push you. Where are you going to go? Where is somebody going to take you? What if they don't take you anywhere? What if you don't expand your adjacent possible? So the strenuous life is like taking it on your own shoulders. I am going to expand the limits of my world. I'm going to do so I can do more. Do the thing and you shall have the power. Do the thing and you get the power to do more. But if you don't do the thing, you have not the power. So let's think this through. So you could stay home all summer and play video games and drink soda and eat chips, right? And that's like whatever, it gets you wherever. You're pretty much going to be the same person as you were 3 months prior, just probably a little flabbier, right? So you could say, you know what, I want to start on the football team. So, but I can't do that right now. I'm not strong enough. So you go to lift weights and you do that work and you run and you eat more protein. And so all these steps, they're in your adjacent possible. You can do them. You do them. Each step builds and builds and builds. And before you know it, you're trying out for the football team. Let's say you make the football team. You worked really hard. You got yourself in a position where you were more powerful. You could do more. Your adjacent possible was radically bigger than it was before. And now, just think about where this goes, because it's really, really important for your education and for your life. So, your goal was to make the football team. So you make the team, and let's just say you're starting, right? You're starting on the team. You're getting playing time. You're building confidence, right? And you're making friends. And you didn't even know it, but a bunch of things is like were there for you to do, but you didn't have the confidence. So now that you add the confidence, that opens up an adjacent possible that wasn't there without the confidence. And maybe you make a friend on the football team who someday is editor of the newspaper, and he pulls you onto the newspaper staff to be a page editor or something. And so you didn't even join the team to make a friend like that. You had no idea that was going to happen, but it happened. And look at where you are now. Now you're on the newspaper staff, and without that friend, you wouldn't have been. But the only reason you made that friend was because you were on the football team. And the only reason you were on the football team is that you dedicated yourself to making the team and lifting weights and working out, as opposed to just sitting there. Do the thing and you shall have the power. They who do not the thing have not the power. That's what the strenuous life is about. You do X, and by doing X, you get A. So you did X, and now you could do A, B, and C because you could do X. But if you didn't do X, you couldn't do A, B, and C. Does that make sense? So this is little Teddy Roosevelt as a tyke. You might think this guy, he's a strenuous life. Well, he must have been this monster, as a child. Actually, no, he almost died. He had such bad asthma that he was perpetually on the brink of suffocating. He was frail and sickly and in bed a lot, and had very bad eyesight for a child. But he got through that. Incredibly curious little boy, very wealthy family and very loving family, very attentive parents and very good parents. He's a high-spirited kid after he gets through his health issues, very active, doesn't go to school. He's educated at home, and they give him really high-power resources. He develops a very intense early interest in nature, especially in animals. So here he is as like a 10th grader. And so you see the huge change that's already happened. By 10th grade, he was the curator of his own natural history museum. He's a stuffer of birds and a collector of plants, and had all these live animals and stuffed animals literally formerly alive animals that he stuffed himself in his house. I was incredibly curious. He was an early voracious reader. Started reading a book a day. There are days he read 2 books. There are days as an adult he read 3 books a day. It's unbelievable powers of concentration. Read tens of thousands of books in his lifetime. He admired his loving father, his intense guy, very much, incredibly close, very much a mentor relationship where, the dad really fostered and nurtured Teddy into quite a force of nature. In particular, he told him when he was, like 8 or 9, look, you're sickly and you're frail, and that's going to hold you back in your life. And you're going to have to build your body. You're going to have to intentionally fix this problem. A lot of kids don't have that. They're just sort of, naturally healthy. You're not naturally healthy. You're naturally frail. But you can't be frail and have a good life. So you're going to have to overcome that. And he did. I mean, again, look at that look in his face. He started lifting weights. He started running. He started rowing. And he became one of the great outdoorsmen in the history of America. One thing his father told him repeatedly when he was young was this phrase, get action. Constantly spurring the boy on to do, getting him to do A so he could do X, Y, and Z, getting him to do B so he could do C, D, and E. And it was remarkably successful. Get action. So another concept that we can introduce that will be real helpful for you to understand Teddy Roosevelt and the strenuous life, as well as your own lives and our character education program. It's called growth mindset. It was coined by a woman named Carol Dweck, who's at Stanford, psychologist. And she, in her research, found this very important distinction in people in general, but young people in particular, and huge outcomes flow from which side of this issue you're on. So there are people who have what she calls growth mindset. There are people who have what she calls static mindset or fixed mindset. And again, we could talk about this for a long time. We'll try to make it short and sweet. People with growth mindset don't really fear failure. They do stuff, and when things don't go right, they don't take that to be anything eternal about themselves or essential about themselves. They're like, wow, I didn't do that well. That means I didn't know how to do it. So that's sort of good, right? You found out you weren't good at something that you either wanted to be good at or needed to be good at. And so now you've got to work harder at it. And so, you learn how to do it and you move on. No big deal. People with fixed mindset, and there are many people with fixed mindset, are so paralyzed by fear of failure that they don't do stuff. Because when they fail, they think that says something essential about them. Oh, I didn't make that team. That means I'm terrible at that, right? Or, I failed the math test, or I got a C in math, or I get B's in English. I'm not a great English student. And so every time something happens, they take that to be the result of an essential quality about them. And Carol Dweck realizes in her research, wow, people can actually work at things and get a lot better at them. But if you think everything's based on traits as opposed to effort, well, then why would you try, right? Because you're already good at it, right? Or you're already bad at it. And so people with growth mindset are far more inclined to experiment. They're far more inclined to, again, expand their adjacent possible. People with fixed mindset, they fear failure. They don't want to take that hit to their own ego of not doing well at something because then they feel terrible about themselves. And so they don't try a lot of things that they're not good at. So they don't expand the adjacent possible in that way for themselves. And again, here's this quote from Michael Jordan, very famous quotation about how much he failed, right? And he's arguably the greatest basketball player of all time. and look at all that failure, and it just spurs him to work harder and get better. So Roosevelt and the Strenuous Life, very much ahead of his day on the growth mindset issue. Here's a quotation from him about the centrality of not fearing failure for a country, to the people of a country, to build a great country, right? They can't be focused on ease. They can't be afraid of making a mistake. They can't be afraid of their own weakness. They have to overcome it, right? It's all about overcoming in that energy. And then, and again, do you wait for it to happen and hope that you overcome problems by sort of lucking into it, or do you set as your goal to push yourself in a way that you're already out front of any problem that you have? You want to overcome problems. You want to find problems you don't even know that you have, so that you can overcome them and expand. So Theodore takes his force of nature to Harvard, and this is a picture of him at Harvard. He was one of the best boxers at the college back when boxing was a bigger deal than it is now. He's an extraordinarily good rower and a big hunter. He continued to read at least a book a day on his own outside of class and made that a life habit. While he was at college, he published a really important book of naval history. He became very interested in the Navy. He had some relatives who had been in the Navy, and he became fascinated by what a powerful Navy does for a country. And he also joined a Porcelian, the creme de la creme of the eating societies, which are the Harvard equivalent of the dining clubs, of the Harvard equivalent of fraternities. And so he's incredibly social, very intellectual, very physical, and starting to look forward to his future as a man and think about what he might do, and starting to make a name for himself. So we are now going to talk about some highlights in Roosevelt's life of ways that he embodied the strenuous life and sort of used it to his advantage. And one of these is this trip out west. If trip is the right word, it's lasted a couple years. After college, he went to become a state legislator in the state of New York, where he was from, and it was very odd for somebody of his social class, to do what he was doing. And again, the social class of his day, the upper crust of New York, life was in many ways about leisure, and work was a bad thing. And obviously, Roosevelt's whole attitude was sort of didn't really fit in very well with a lot of his peers. It did with some, but not with others. And nobody went into politics from his social class, and he really wanted to serve, and again, what a great way to build yourself, to serve your world, figure out what the world needs. What a great project to build your world, and you build yourself at the same time. And so he does that, loses his father right after college. That was a huge blow. And things are going good, though, for him. They're going well. He's a good legislator. He's in the news all the time, but on the same day, his mother, with whom he was very close, dies, and his wife, with whom he's very close, dies, and it's a huge blow to him, double blow, and he loses it, and he goes into a funk, and he can't deal with it. And so he heads west to clear his head, to outride his demons, as he put it. And he goes on 1,000-mile cattle drives, and he learns the ways of a cowboy. And he buys this property and builds a ranch, like literally works with some other guys and builds the actual ranch house and the fences and all that stuff. He really becomes an actual cowboy, and overcomes a lot of fears he didn't know he had, gets very close to nature, and gets very close to a lot of people that he's never met before. Just types of people that, unless you live out in the West, you don't even know they're there. And so he really expands who he is at this time in really positive ways. He comes to own sort of a sense of what America is and the American West. And it was a hugely positive experience for him that he grew from very much. So we move on to another extraordinary thing that Roosevelt did that he's known for. He created this group of guys out of nothing called the Rough Riders. It was his response to the Spanish-American War, and he wanted to be in that war. He wanted the experience of fighting. He wanted to help his country. He was a huge believer in America, as we will discuss, in an imperialistic way, and he was eager to get the Spanish out of Cuba. So, he wasn't in the army, so he formed this group of volunteers, and he at that time, again, this is before tanks or anything, the cavalry was, a big part of the military, and he knew all these great horsemen that he met out west, and he knew great athletes, and he knew great hunters, and he knew great marksmen, not saint marksmen, but people who could shoot rifles well, and he pieced these guys together, and it's an extraordinary group of people. We could spend weeks on the sociology of this group. There's some of the wealthiest men from Manhattan who are in the finest clubs in the world. The best amateur American tennis player was in the group. A lot of cowboys he met from South Dakota are in the group. He didn't care about race. He didn't care about anything, but can you contribute to this group and help win this war? And that's the group he put together, and they were incredibly successul. They assaulted on their own without really any coordination two of the most important hills in the fight to get the Spanish out of Cuba. And he was rather reckless, actually, with the lives of his men in order to attain this glory, though they didn't seem to mind. Again, many of them interviewed afterwards said it was the highlight of their life and how extraordinary to work with Theodore Roosevelt. So we don't have time to look into everything that Teddy Roosevelt accomplished in his life. It's pretty amazing, though, so we're going to run through the list of just some highlights. Try to imagine looking forward in your life, like if one of these things, right, or two of these things were on your resume at the end of your life, you'd be like, wow, that was pretty good. And, this is the result of the strenuous life as a life philosophy as put into practice by Teddy Roosevelt, a life dedicated to pushing his own limits, till failure, and then learning from what he didn't know how to do and making sure then he learned how to do that. So he founded a museum of natural history as a child and actually charged admission. He was a champion boxer. He was in the most prestigious social club at Harvard. He's a very devoted father and husband. He's a state legislator in New York. He ran a cattle ranch and built it from scratch. He was police commissioner in New York. He was governor of New York. He wrote 30 books. He assembled the Rough Riders. Over 150,000 personal letters. He conserved an amazing number of acres of wildlife in the United States and national parks and forest preserves and game preserves and bird sanctuaries. He's Assistant Secretary of the Navy. He's Vice President of the United States, and by the way, President of the United States, of course. He got shot actually in a campaign speech. He got shot in the chest, but when he realized that his mouth wasn't bleeding, he knew that the bullet hadn't gone into his lungs, so he actually gave the 90-minute speech, even though he'd been shot in the chest before they took him to the hospital, and he was in pretty bad shape. He built the Panama Canal. He pushed that project through. He went after his stint in the White House. He went on an unbelievable African safari where he sent thousands of animals back to museums throughout the world in the United States. He read at least 20,000 books. Nobody really knows, maybe more like 30,000, some say, in the course of his lifetime, with great understanding. He won the Nobel Peace Prize for helping end the war between Japan and Russia around the turn of the century. And he charted, at the end of his life, think about Pecos and how trying that was. Well, he went into the Amazon basin and tried to follow a river up to its source where, nobody had ever found it before. So, this is the stuff of legend. And the strenuous life is the life philosophy that brought that little boy who was so frail to this amazing amount of achievement and accomplishment. So let's look at how the strenuous life as a life philosophy from a boy onwards actually affects his leadership trajectory. Remember, leadership has three main parts. You start with engagement, you move on towards service, and then you move on to coordinating the activities of others toward shared goals. Coordinating is much harder than merely serving. Serving you can do on your own. Serving is much harder than engaging, because engaging is just you're there, you're positive, right? You're curious, your energies are there. Service, you're looking to help particular people, right? By yourself mostly, trying to help get things done, trying to figure out what other people's needs are and to address them. And then coordination is where you're actually planning strategically to get a bunch of different people on board to solve a problem. And that has its own skills. So think about his life. He starts with hyper curiosity. He analyzes the physical world. He makes a museum in his house. He's engaged in his family. He's engaged in sports. He's engaged in social groups. And then he moves on to service, right? He takes service jobs like a state legislator, trying to do his best for New York. A governor, assistant secretary of Navy, working at the ranch. He's building his skills. You don't go from being a frail 5-year-old to president of the United States in one step. There's so many steps in the adjacent possible. He's constantly building his adjacent possible by taking on more service, more difficult service. And then ultimately coordination, right? Running a ranch, building out the Rough Riders and leading them into battle. And then ultimately the vice president job, the president job, just again, step by step by step, expanding his skill set. And that's what we're going to ask you to do, right? Are you engaging now? Right now, you should be engaging and moving towards service. Is that where you are? We're going to need you at St. Mark's to be coordinators. By your junior year, you're going to need to be able to coordinate McDonald's week. Are you ready to do that? Not yet, probably, right? You have to get there, and you get there by gradually building out your adjacent possible by taking on more and more. One of Teddy Roosevelt's most famous sayings, a leadership lesson he learned and applied with great skill, was speak softly and carry a big stick. So what did he mean by that? Well, speak softly means that you approach people uncoercively, right? You try to figure out what they need, you try to deal with them, you try to cooperate with them and collaborate with them. Speak softly, don't push people around. As much as possible, let people self-determine. But he found that carrying a big stick, meaning if you have to coerce people, you need to be ready, willing, and able to do so, right? You have to have a big stick and know how to use it so that you can force people to act properly if need be. And so he found that by having the big stick, it allowed him to speak more softly, right? If people know that eventually they're going to have to agree, they're going to agree sooner, and they're going to take more effort on the front end to accomplish the goals, and then you won't need to coerce people. So we talked about building yourself in the different parts of the self, and let's look at how Theodore Roosevelt does it and how the strenuous life philosophy actually works for that, right? He starts with that little frail body, and his dad tells him, is like, you're not going to be able to accomplish what you need to with that frail body. So he starts training, and he becomes very physically powerful. I can't stress enough, boys, how important that is in the world, right? That you actually have a presence, that you feel the muscle and effectiveness in your body. It really helps you to have an attitude that you're going to be an effective person in general. His intellect he develops, he reads a book or two or three a day, right? He studies the world. It's the world he needs to care for. He studies how to care for it, and he learns a lot that way. He engages in all sorts of social environments, from the cowboys out west to Porcellian at Harvard to all sorts of friendships and clubs and hunting societies. He's an incredibly social guy, builds out a massive web so that when he needs to do something like put together the Rough Riders, he's got all these contacts, he's got all these relationships, and he can do it. Unbelievable effective character, right? He builds his character by serving and leading and engaging, right? He's constantly acting and realizing what works, realizing what doesn't, fails, succeeds, fails, gets up, dusts himself off, learns from his mistakes, moves forward. His telos is high, right? His telos is sort of like limitless practically, but he's got this idea, I'm going to be a potent man in the world and help solve its chief problems. And he ultimately becomes president of the United States at that time, maybe even today, the most powerful person in the world. And he has an incredible narrative, right? Does anybody have a better narrative than this guy? The stories of his life, you can't tell the history of America without telling his story. He can't tell his story without telling the whole history of America. It's an incredible life, an incredible self that this guy built, and looked at in just one more lens, right? The head, heart, hands lens. Think about his life. Again, he builds the head. He studies. He writes constantly, right? Writes 30 books, reads tens of thousands of books, travels all over the world, meets people. He's trying to understand the world that he's in so that he can deal with it. The heart, he tries to figure out, like, what do people need? He tries to feel with them. What's going on with this person, this cowboy, this aristocrat, this steel worker, right? What's going on with these people? And so he can respond to them with generosity. And then the hands, he's just constantly doing, get action, go try. You're going to test your skills, you're going to realize what you can do and what you can't do, and you're going to know where you need to do your work. And it's because that he develops his head, his heart, and his hands that he puts himself in position to be such a great president, a great leader of the whole country, because he understands the sweep of a whole human life, right? That it's about understanding in your mind, that it's about feeling in your heart, and it's about being able to do with your hands, so that, the prosperity of a country is about the GDP and the GNP, but it's not completely about the GDP or the GNP. Those are just ways to help a country be great so that people can enjoy being parents, so that they can bring their kids to national parks, so that they can live full human lives. One of his complaints about, especially judges, but people that he met in his adult life as a politician, when he's trying to get the best laws passed, right? He says they knew legalism, not life. And that means these people are living in their cramped little worlds that they grew up in. They haven't been out there to see it, right? They haven't gone west. They haven't rallied troops up a hill in Cuba. They haven't gone to see the Panama Canal being built, right? They know rules, but they don't know the people's actual lived lives. And again, the strenuous life has been pushing him to learn all that, to experience all that himself. And if you don't know the fullness of life, because you haven't pushed yourself to know it, you're going to make mistakes when you try to lead the world. Look at the ways that the strenuous life philosophy really pushed this guy to be off the charts. He's just incredibly physically brave. He puts himself at great risk in doing these 1,000-mile cattle drives. He puts himself at great risk in charging up San Juan Hill with the Rough Riders, in going to the malaria-ridden jungle of the Panama Canal zone, of going on that safari in Africa, and then in his 50s to go in a canoe up a tributary of the Amazon where no European heritaged person has ever gone before. I mean, it's just like unbelievable, right? Push. So you're like, oh, but the strain. But again, the strain is what it's about, right? That's what it's about. So what most of us take most of the time, it's like, oh, this is strenuous, therefore we will stop doing it. He's like, oh, this is strenuous, that means something good is happening. Moral courage, and we haven't talked about this yet, but he has incredible moral courage to take on corrupt policemen when he's police commissioner, to take on corrupt bureaucrats when he's governor of New York, to take on and bust the trusts that were made, which were really just these monopolies in the oil business and the steel business and the coal business in the United States. Moral strain. He was used to moral strain. When it hurt morally to push and get this pushback and get criticized, where most of us stop, again, he has this attitude like, well, that means something good is happening, right? I'm growing, and that's why it hurts. Sort of like your muscles hurt when you're on your 15th rep bench pressing or something, right? The growth mindset, off the chart. His life is devoted to the expansion of his own power in the service of the world. That's what his life is about. When you get up in the morning, is that what your life is about? When you walk to school in the morning, are you even trying explicitly to grow, or are you just at school? And élan vital, this sense of the spirit of life. By living so thoroughly, he developed an incredible sense of living thoroughly and an excitement about it. So many people, hundreds of people, thousands of people, tens of thousands of people said just being in this guy's presence was electrifying because there's just such a love of life. He was apparently the biggest laugher in the history of the White House. He's just delighting in the business of the day in a way that the staffers had never seen before. Let's do a kind of assessment of Theodore Roosevelt on the virtues that we're trying to build in each other here at St. Mark's. Benevolence, we put the ones in blue that are I think he's strong in. We can discuss this, but and red, maybe some weakness. So benevolence, he seems to really want everybody to thrive in the whole world. America in particular. Empathy, he's out there meeting people and feeling with them, and compassion. He wants the square deal. He wants everybody to have a fair shot at their life. Wisdom, sort of off the charts, understanding of the world. Generosity, huge spirit, right? Completely giving of himself as he grows and just gives more and more. Modesty, probably a weakness, and we'll have to think through what that ends up costing him in the world. But when you've got that much going for you, it's pretty tough to be modest. Imagination, huge, again, from the Panama Canal to authoring treaties to end wars. He really imagines his solutions to problems. Courage, off the charts. Resilience, resoluteness, just sticks with things, doesn't worry about failure, right? Because failure is just going to teach him more how to do it better. He's going to succeed. Detail orientation, huge. Constancy, again, the sticking with things. Loves America, devotes his whole life to it, loves the world, loves democracy. And then the habitual attitude of entrepreneurial service. Yes, just always looking to help. How can I help? How can I do this better? How can I help us have a better world? So let's have a look now at the skills checklist. Again, some of these things that I leave in black, I just don't know, right? But just from reading the history book and knowing what I do and studying Teddy Roosevelt, most of these things are off the charts in blue. Responding, respecting, including, cooperating, collaborating, advocating, mentoring, providing, cultivating, protecting, envisioning, planning, communicating, delegating, completing, listening, defining, imagining, inventing, evaluating. Just an ace problem solver. It's just a man who has mastered getting involved and getting people together to get stuff done for the common good. Here's a picture of Sagamore Hill, which is the house he built. Just beautiful design. There's tusks from elephants he killed and the books he's read and written, and it's just sort of a living museum of the glory of all that he did and accomplished in his life. So let's look now at some potential problems with this guy. Remember, we've talked about how virtues are almost always in the middle between vices of deficiency, you don't have enough, or excess, you have too much. And you could see how this philosophy of the strenuous life, if pushed too hard, could cause problems, right? Because it's certainly in danger always of going too far. So when you get as much power and force of being and personality as this guy has, when you're capable of so much, the danger of being hubristic is huge, right? That's of being overly confident, overly brash, and certainly many people he met thought he was that. Probably his biggest issue is a kind of bloodthirsty militarism and imperialism. We talked about, lack of modesty being a problem. And as much as he knew about the world and as much as he wanted everyone to thrive, he never lost a kind of central prejudice of his day, which is that industrial democracy is the way to go, and that any country that is behind in becoming an industrial democracy is a sort of banana republic in desperate need of help from the United States and other successful industrial democracies. Or to put it another way, that all other countries are sort of false copies of America, that America is the way every country should be. Other countries aren't like America, therefore there's something wrong with them, and therefore we're justified in going in there and changing them. And so he also thought wars were sort of good for the soul periodically of a country. They rally people together, they get them off their butts and fighting for good over evil. And, the First World War, as we will see when we get there, was, a nightmare. And the Second World War and the Vietnam War. And once you start coupling 20th century technology with this sort of desire for warlike spirit, you get really dangerous situations in the world. And in hindsight, these are probably areas that were pretty problematic for our friend Teddy. So on this issue, we might ask, what's the price of this extraordinary bravery, right? Like, do you ultimately need to kill other living things in order to push yourself to the limits of your being? And, I hope probably not, right? And so as we wrap this up, we really want you to start thinking about where you stand on these issues and where you stand on the strenuous life. So let's look at this quotation. The man must be glad to do a man's work, to dare and endure, and to labor to keep himself and to keep those dependent upon him. And so where are you on that? Are you glad to do a man's work? Are you glad to do a boy's work? Right? When you come to school, are you looking forward to the work that is your work that day? Helping your classmates, of learning, of serving, of beginning to serve the school, of mastering the world in your understanding? Or again, are you just showing up? Is your goal leisure? And work is this thing people force you to do that you don't want to do. Because there are plenty of men whose goal is leisure and who view their work as a burden, and they wish they didn't have to do it. But remember, we talked about this. If you're going to be doing that work for about 95% of your day, how tragic if you didn't get on the right side of looking forward to it. So the strenuous life is sort of training in that attitude, and it's an attitude that, as we've seen, leads perhaps to the most fascinating, powerful, positive life of that time in the history of the planet, Teddy Roosevelt's life. And so let's just read this out loud. It's probably Teddy Roosevelt's greatest statement of the strenuous life, his greatest life statement about what his life was about and how he thinks people end up thriving and building themselves into people who can help other people thrive. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. What a great statement of growth mindset there, right? Every great effort fails along the way. The question is, do you even aspire to greatness? Do you aspire to be a kind of person that can help move Dallas forward someday, that can help move St. Mark's forward someday, a family forward someday? Or is it just sort of you and Sports Center and video games and just you just sort of, trying to feel pleasant during your day? Have you thought about this? Where are you on this?